Today's video, we're going to look at how we make these two Mosaic Damascus chef's knives with Mammoth tooth handles. Very difficult to grind. Also, we're going to look at a Mosaic pattern and how we can quadruple it and make a more complex pattern out of that as well. I'd like to ask you to subscribe and like the video. It really helps with us to be able to produce content. Let's begin. Here we have the metal that we're stacking so that we can get the pattern that we want. We will have a video coming out soon that shows how I manipulate the stack to get the pattern. Next, the billet comes out of our quenching oil, and the oil acts as a protectant. When it burns, it turns to soot. The soot prevents the oxygen from attacking the metal until we set the weld like we're doing here. Then back into the forge. The key to setting good welds is to keep the billet hot while you're working it, and that's especially when you're setting the weld. So the first weld is just to stick it together, and then I can move the metal here. But always back into the forge and work it hot. The weight of this hammer really solidifies that billet. You can hear it in how it sounds solid. And this way, while I got good heat, I'm able to draw the bar out. But as soon as I start losing color, back into the forge. So this is a heavy billet. It probably weighs about 27 pounds. It's a lot of material, and only half of it can fit in the forge, as you can see in the video. But this will give me a lot of material to manipulate for the final billet. So I have to forge this out in two pieces, the front half and the back half. It's a little bit of a challenge, but with this hammer, make short work of it. Once we flatten out the billet and make it straight, then we will cut it into 5 different pieces and restack it. Then we can further manipulate the pattern. Once the forge comes up to temperature, the billet is placed back in. Here's the stack of 5 that have been welded all the way around the seam. That way I have a closed atmosphere. I grind the excess weld off the sides so it doesn't get forged into the billet. And then it comes under the hammer once again and we set the weld. And we're going to re-square this billet to manipulate the pattern. When the billet starts to lose its heat, back into the forge it goes. Remember, work it hot. Now that I've consolidated the billet, now I'm going to re-square it. In other words, I'm going to push in on the corners and it's going to completely change the pattern. This is one of the first major manipulations of getting the pattern we're looking for. I have re-squaring dies that helps to keep this nice and uniform and press in where it needs to be done. Now what we do is draw out the billet so that it's about 1.5 inches square, and then we'll cut it into 4 pieces, put those 4 pieces together, that's called a 4-way, and then forge weld that together, and that will give us the pattern on the end. Once the bar is drawn out, like it is here, to about 1.5 inches, then we're going to cut it into 4 pieces. And then what I do is etch the end of the pieces so I can see what the pattern looks like, so I know how to manipulate it, and I make sure I put marks to know what sides to clean. Then I go and clean off the decarbonization so that we have perfect sides to marry together when we forge weld it. And I will weld all the way around this so that it gives me a closed atmosphere, so I have perfect welds. Once I weld all the way around the billet, I take it to the grinder and grind off the excess of the weld. That way I don't push it into my pattern. So now we put the 4-way billet into the forge when it comes up to temperature. Then we draw it out and we will have one very specific pattern on the end, as you can see here. And then from there we can manipulate this pattern into other patterns as well. So once this billet is forged out and you saw what the pattern looks like, then from here we can do all kinds of things to manipulate the steel to make many different patterns. For example, this is just a solid pattern on the end. We could 4-way this again, and it would give us that same pattern 4 different times on the end of the billet. We could 9-way it, and that would be a much more complex pattern, where there'd be 9 pieces that would get forged into that pattern. So there's many different types of manipulation we could do to that. For example, 4-way it and then re-square it. That gives us a completely different pattern. And then from there you can 9-way that. It just depends on how complex you want the pattern to be. So this billet we 4-wayed once again, and then we cut it into tiles. Now we're ready to forge this into a knife. What I do here is I tack weld the corners so the billet doesn't move, and then I solid weld the seam. Now those are cut at a 35-degree angle so that they overlap each other. So once the welds are ground off and it comes up to temperature, then right to the hammer and set the weld. Now it is solid. And remember, forge it hot. So at this point in the blade, we have forge welded the integral bolsters on, we have hardened the blade, and now we're going to finish grinding. You can see that pattern really pop. Now the blade goes into a jig where I can cut square shoulders so it marries perfectly to the mammoth tooth. So here we have mammoth tooth, very hard material. It looks beautiful when it's done. So now, here's where the work begins. This handle is like grinding concrete. Those are ceramic belts I'm using, and I went through 7 of them to get the rough shape I needed. As I grind this handle to shape, a lot of care has to be given to make sure that I keep it cool, otherwise it could crack on me. So once I have sanded the handle up to about 800 grit, then I take it to the buffer. And like I've said before, most dangerous tool in the shop, hang on tight. That handle just is so beautiful. Thanks for sticking around to the end of the video. Please subscribe and like. That will help us produce more content. Also, if you have something that you would like me to make, leave a comment and I'll see if I can accommodate.